Welcome to Impact Media Presents. I'm Kelly Redmond, your host, and today we're talking about dealing with loss and grief. Many of us have experienced quite a bit of loss in 2020. It has been quite a year, from just regular illness, death, things we were anticipating, some that we weren't. And then in March to really be exposed to COVID-19 and all of the things affiliated with COVID-19 and quarantine and having to shelter in place and be in quarantine at home all across the country and all over the world. And then, to have, the civil unrest in response to the police killings and murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, and the police response to that with the helicopters and the sirens just continuously through the day and the night. It's just been a lot. It's been extremely overwhelming. Um, so today we're actually bringing in some experts from the County of Los Angeles Department of Mental Health, and I'd like you to welcome our special guest, Dr. Yashado Lang and Franklin Romero. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here, Kelly.
Thank you
Thank
for having us.
you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, how have you been dealing with quarantine? It's one thing when, as a professional and as a person, we're dealing with all of this. I'm sure you are in the business of caring for others. Not too many people check on you, I'm guessing. So, tell us how you're doing with all of this.
Oh, wow. Whoa. Thank you for asking that question. Just like everybody else, it's a parallel process for ourselves. We're human as well.
Right.
And people have to check in on us. And we
Yes.
have to do our own self-care as a means of protecting ourselves and providing for others as well. It's
Yes.
we have to be well ourselves in order to be present and be fully used as a vessel to help heal and work with someone else. So we have to
It's
do our
very
own work,
important.
right, Franklin? Yeah.
Definitely, I have to agree with Dr. Lang, taking care of ourselves, making sure that we're present to be able to help people who are in crisis, um, to be able to be well, both physically and emotionally, to help others is extremely important.
Absolutely. So I want you both to tell us a little bit more about what you do and also tell us why you do this work and why this work is so important to you. Franklin, why don't you start?
Okay. My name is Franklin Romero. I work for the Department of Mental Health, like Kelly said. This work, what I do specifically in the Department of Mental Health with suicide prevention and education, is important for me because I am able to train so many different folks out in the community, whether they are community members to other clinicians and other professions in suicide prevention, and just being able to not only train, but I also work in crisis response, both at a hospital here, Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, as well as
Mhm.
crisis response in the county. That's very important and fulfilling for me. And so I love what I do.
It's
Yes, this is
very
indeed.
clear.
It's indeed fulfilling work, Franklin. And my role within the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health is as a supervising psychologist. And I supervise a team of mental health providers and targeted case managers. And we are in the trenches delivering mental health services and targeted case management day in and day out, working with the severely and persistently mentally ill. And I got into this to be of service, especially with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, to work with those who typically wouldn't um, be able to benefit from mental health services, and creating that access, creating that um, sense of community and wellness, and to be about healing. That's the reason why I
Mhm.
got into this. And it's very fulfilling on a number of fronts. The process can be slow, but it's very
Mhm.
rewarding. You're changing lives and impacting people, and it has ripple effects. So,
It's extremely important. And I know that I don't know the statistics, I'm sure you do, that typically in communities of color, we are not necessarily accessing these resources, that are available. Can you speak to the importance of us in particular who are, experiencing the healthcare disparities at the highest levels, the trauma at the highest levels, and how important it is that we tap into resources and that there's so many free resources, that are available. Can you speak to that for us, please?
Definitely. It's definitely important to have people of color working with people of color.
Yes.
And Franklin, he's in training. And I failed to mention this as well. I'm a training director over at the Augustus F. Hawkins Clinic, where I supervise psychology interns and externs, social work externs as well. So I'm involved in training as well. And that's very important. We got to build a pipeline for other people coming through. But for years, there's been a huge stigmatization with mental health, right? I mean,
Yes.
from going back to as far as like the Tuskegee experiments and people's
Yes.
lack of trust of healthcare systems and the system, so to speak, right?
Yes.
So it's important for us to be in places and be seen and be heard, and not to be so quick to pathologize others, particularly people of color, in situations like that. And then also, I mean, mental health services, we typically got it from church, right? And it hasn't been afforded, or not much has been known about what mental health services can do. There's this stigma of like, I don't want anybody in my business, or
right.
So we're finding out and discovering as more access is created, it's not so bad. Mental health is not so bad. So at one point, it wasn't as affordable as it is and accessible as it is now. So again, it's important for Black and Brown and people of color all around to make this modality available to our community.
And isn't it important, in order for us to get the level of support and the funding that we need for those of us, to take advantage of what is available? Are you finding that, your offices are flooded right now, or, does everyone still have open space on their calendars?
It's tough. It's tough right now. There's a lot of calls coming in. People are dealing with stress on multiple levels, right? As you mentioned, from COVID to the social unrest, just grief and loss in general. And people are just hoping to get in and talk to somebody and relate to someone to kind of iron out what it is that they're going through. And we need more people. We need more people of color working in this field, in the mental health field, to be a resource, to be healers.
Absolutely. Franklin, please.
And just to add to what Dr. Lang said, I think one of the most important things to do in mental health is to have a shift in the way that we work. One of the awesome things that my unit does is we're able to train clergy on suicide prevention and mental health in general. So I feel that because we are taking these steps into destigmatizing what mental health may look like in our communities of color, and people most often will seek spiritual guidance or help from their community leaders and spiritual leaders, and doing what we're doing, it's helping chip away at that stigma, which is really important for us to even take that first step and acknowledging that something is not right, and then accepting that outside help that many times historically we've seen communities of color face a lot of barriers, but also a lot of consequences for things that may come up, poverty, child abuse, sexual abuse, all those type of things.
Yes. And so let's dig in a little bit to what we can do to address some of these specific things that we're dealing with, some of the challenges that we're dealing with on top of the normal challenges before, COVID. But now that, we're experiencing, and we're in survival mode, with COVID-19, on all fronts for our overall health and wellness to, financial, health and wellness from, loss of jobs, loss of, businesses, contract opportunities, whatever. Let's talk about how people can, tap into support to deal with all that this overwhelming uh, sense of loss that we're experiencing right now. Either one of you.
Okay. Franklin, you want to go first?
Yes, I think what we are seeing is a communal sense of loss, and that's one of the things that in my unit we've been able to talk about with our clergy, our faith-based leaders, that this communal grief is taking a toll on people because things that as human beings we like predictability, we like to make sure that we're in control, and a lot of the things that we thought we were in control and that we could predict would keep us safe, we're seeing that unfortunately, they're no longer there. We're seeing that the justice system, we're seeing that medical care isn't adequate, and there is a complete inequity in communities of color. So I think that communal grief is very big, and it takes a huge toll on the well-being of not only parents but also children.
Yes. And it's especially tough because the places that we normally go to for support, we can't access anymore. We can't go to church, for prayer and worship in the ways that we would, or connect with, different ministries that we may be a part of, or social groups or support groups that were happening live. And grateful for the use of technology and everyone being creative and pivoting, really quickly in the midst of this. Um, have you found that participating in the virtual experience has been helpful? I know it's been helpful for me. I know there's some people who just do not like it and won't do it at all. So tell a little bit about what you understand about the research, the benefits of connecting virtually versus not connecting at all.
That's a good question. And connecting virtually is better than not connecting at all, right? Although some people it may not sit well, and you can't feel that other person in the room with you. But it's venues like this that allow us to connect,
right?
Even though our institutions are maybe not functioning with the way they used to, or how they could. And in that is an opportunity for us. And I think this pivot, as you mentioned, Kelly, is very important. We gotta find ways to embrace the technology and accept it and having said that, I mean, within Black and Brown communities, there's this notion of the digital divide, right? So it's imperative that those of us who do have access work to create ways for others. We got to lift each other up as we climb.
Absolutely.
We're only doing as well as the least of us. So that in itself is an opportunity. So even though our institutions may not be functioning at the proper level, and in some cases that may be a good thing, as far as the way law enforcement has approached things in the past. But it's through our communities that we can coalesce and come together to be about the healing process. I think there's an opportunity there for us, huge, but we just got to be able to grasp it. And it's a challenge.
Definitely. I noticed that we have a comment or a question. Let me take a look at that. And then Franklin, I'll let you respond to that. Sandy said, to familiarize our communities of color with the issue of suicide and how to intervene is so critical. That's very, very true. Do either of you want to respond to that?
Sure. I think it is extremely crucial in our communities of color to make sure that we're having these conversations of not only celebrating when we're doing good, but also uplifting and helping one another when we are in crisis, when we're not doing well. And sometimes there is a lot of shame and a lot of stigma associated with asking for help, because the secret is out. Somebody's going to
Right.
know that you're not doing well. Somebody's going to know that maybe in the past you have had a suicide attempt and that you're currently struggling. And a lot of the things that we've worked hard for, we feel might be taken away from us, or people might judge us. But it's extremely important to foster these conversations from an early age, and to really use resources in our communities and other people who could help uplift us when we're not feeling well, and connecting to other services when we're in crisis.
So I'm going to ask a real kind of practical question. Um, a lot of people go around undiagnosed. You know, they're struggling, they're having problems, and they don't even really know or understand that they may be suffering with some type of mental health issue, especially something like a depression. What do you recommend anyone do if they're feeling, extremely sad, they can't stop crying, they don't, and they just think this is normal, like this is life, this is what's going on. How what would you say are some of the first steps to take and things that people can do when they're just not feeling like themselves and, you know, need help and don't know where to go or where to turn? Let's say, they've had death in their family, maybe for the first time, or a series of deaths, as many of us are experiencing. I just recently, in the past 3 weeks, lost my godfather as well as my
Oh no.
mentor for 32 years.
Sorry
And
to hear
I'm wearing black in honor of Joe Bankhead and CT Vivian today. Um, and as even though I've known since Father's Day that we were coming to the end, and they
that.
were older gentlemen, 90s, but at the same time, it's still such a significant loss. And I didn't even realize how difficult, it would be for me, knowing that and appreciating having them for so many decades in my life. It's still, it can overwhelming, especially on top of everything
Right.
else. So
Mm.
for those who don't know, because I've talked to people throughout the years, I'm grateful for parents who understood the importance of, counseling and therapy. And I experienced a lot of loss in my life from early in my childhood when my brother was misdiagnosed with, he ended up having spinal meningitis and pneumonia that went undetected for a while. And as a result, from the age of 2, he couldn't walk or couldn't talk anymore. So I've dealt with a lot of loss and grief in my life.
Yeah.
But a lot of people haven't experienced, or they just don't know where to turn, and they're
Yeah.
dealing with it the best they can. And a lot of times people are struggling internally and then they take it out on others around them. And so a lot of us suffer for those who are not getting the help that they need. So
Right.
how do we take care of ourselves and be good to others by taking care of ourselves?
One of the first things you could do is just acknowledging what is taking place. I know a
Right.
lot in our culture, in our communities, we are just taught to like just put our head down and just deal with it, go, keep moving. You got to be strong. You got to be, you know, for everybody else. But we feel
Depression
what
is
we
a
feel.
sin.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mhm.
So one of the first things to do is just to acknowledge what's taking place, acknowledge
Yeah,
what you're feeling. And there's several stages of grief and loss. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware of those, but I'll just quickly share them.
that'd be
There's
great.
denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And there's no particular order to this process as we deal with grief and loss differently. Each of us deal with grief and loss differently. And we can spend different amounts of time in either one of those stages. It's definitely a process, and there's no particular sequence. So at some point or another, you'll go through those phases: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Maybe as we talk further, we can talk a little bit more about each one of those. But first, acknowledging what those things are, acknowledging how you feel, and then moving forward from there. And then, of course, no man or woman is an island. So it's important to, once you identify what's going on with yourself, reach out to family, friends, church. If it's not there, resources within the community. So we're social beings. We're social.
Mm-hmm.
So we need those sounding boards and those opinions and those thoughts of like, hey, are you all right? Have you, checked yourself? How you doing?
Right.
So yeah.
Franklin?
Yeah, and keeping in mind with what Dr. Lang said, each culture, even though we may all look like we belong, to one culture, it's really important to have cultural considerations, because each
Yes.
religion, each culture is going to be showing that loss in a very different way. And we know that
Yes.
Western culture a lot of times kind of dictates, if we're lucky, we have 3 days of bereavement leave from work, and then you come back and you're supposed to act like everything is normal. And the work that I've done in the past with children, one of the ways that I explain grief and loss is, it's almost like when you're walking by the beach. You're walking on the sand and you see the wave coming in, and that wave could be a wave of anger, it could be a wave of depression, and then it kind of subsides, and so you're good for that day when it's subsided, but then it comes back for no reason. And so I think it's important for people to be patient with themselves, but also for the people around them, like Dr. Lang mentioned, to really build that community of support, and to, in a genuine way, ask, if somebody needs help, instead of saying, why haven't you gotten over this? There are better ways of showing that you care for somebody in a more empathetic way.
You know what? That's a really good point. How can people on the outside who see someone struggling, how can they be a good friend, a good family member to support someone who's struggling, that may not necessarily have gotten to that, anywhere near that acceptance stage, but, kind of going through that process, let's start at the top, who may be in denial, just flat out denial. How can people gently, encourage and support someone who needs help?
Gently. That's the key word. Gently. It's got to be done so in love, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of insight for that person to realize, like, oh, maybe there is something wrong. Maybe something, I haven't showered in a week. Something's wrong. Or I haven't talked to people that I normally talk to. Something is off. So it takes.
What are some of those other warning signs? Those are good ones. What are some more?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, as you mentioned, Kelly, like problems at work, irritability, getting along with others. As mental health professionals, Franklin and I, we look at the level of impairment. So just because you experience some feelings of sadness or loss or even lots of energy, it doesn't make you crazy or anything like that. And that's what we have to do to continue to educate and destigmatize mental health. But one of the key things that we look for, is the level of impairment. How is this functioning? How is this negatively impacting your ability to function? Are you, how are your relationships? Are you able to work? Are you not able to tend to your activities of daily living? Are you not able to get around? So
sleep is important too, right?
Yes, very. Yeah. How's your sleeping? How's your eating? Your self-care? Yes. And so those things we take into account. And sometimes, I'll be quite frank with you, in watching someone go through those things, it's painful. It's
Yes.
painful watching them go through the depression. It's painful watching, I'm just thinking of Kanye. It's painful watching him go through his manic phases, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely hard, but we gotta keep continuing to nudge them with love. If we come at them from a, hey, you crazy, yo, you need to get some help, that kind of defensive stance, it's not gonna
Yes.
be warm and embracing and welcoming. And that's what people need, especially in a time where they're feeling grief, loss, and isolation, right? So they need love. We need love.
Absolutely. So here's another really critical point, I believe, especially in our communities, is going somewhere, as we talked about earlier, somewhere you can trust, with people that you can trust, and trust that you're going to get a diagnosis that is, accurate, and uh, that you can trust. So, what are some tips around evaluating kind of the quality of care and the quality of guidance and professional support that you're seeking?
So one of the things that I do when I work with families and children, I'm very upfront with the parents, and because Dr. Lang and I work in a public mental health system, our patients have the same rights as anybody else in requesting a change of provider. So let's say I'm a therapist for somebody, and the patient feels like it's not working. It's really important for them to voice their opinion, because the last thing you want to do is for that first time that somebody's engaging with a system of care, for it to be like a bad experience.
Hmm.
And so I always tell my kids and the families that I work with that it's extremely important, and not everybody's going to be a great fit with everybody, and
Right.
just because you're engaging in a public mental health system doesn't mean that I'm stuck with you for life. There's options. You could talk to the person supervisor, you could request a change of therapist.
Mhm.
And that I think is extremely important, especially when we're talking about communities of color, where there is a
Hmm.
lot of fear. If I say something,
Right.
then I'm just going to be dropped, right? Nobody's going to take care of me and my needs. But it's extremely important to do the opposite of that, to make sure that we're verbal, that when we feel that something isn't right, or maybe we want to take a different approach, maybe I want somebody that looks like me, that also too is extremely important, and honoring what our patients and our families and our community need and want.
That's so
Absolutely.
important. And just because I'm a therapist of color doesn't mean that I'll fit with every client that comes in.
Right.
There has to be a natural rapport that is built there. So it's not just important that we have clinicians of color working with clients as well, but they have to have a true understanding of the cultural dynamics, the innuendos, the being able to relate. And so that's why it's important for people like Franklin and I to kind of help
Hmm.
train and see people come through the pipeline that not only look like us, but can relate to the clients that we work with.
Hmm. And so here's a question. How does someone know when therapy and counseling and whatever else is being uh, either prescribed, whether it's activity based or if it's medical based? How do you know when it's really working? uh, what are some of the outcomes that you can see and look for to gauge whether or not it's working? Because sometimes you can be in a counseling or therapeutic relationship and you can be comfortable, but is it working?
That's a very good question. Very good question. One of the things that you may see as you work with clients, that one way to tell if the interventions are working is not only this their continence or how they care of themselves, but how it's impacting other areas of their life. Again, we talked
Hmm.
about the level of impairment in
Hmm.
which those previous symptoms or negative symptoms are impacting them. So are
Hmm.
they getting along? Are their relationships improving? Are they functioning at work? Are they attending to their activities of daily living? it's not rocket science, and it can be small things as well. Are
Mhm.
they, do they feel more fulfilled in life and having a purpose? It's some
Mhm.
things like that as well that can kind of nudge some people along the way.
Mhm. Do you have something to share on that, Franklin?
Yes. In regards to people who may be seeking therapy because they're having suicidal thoughts or having thoughts that are very distressing, one of the ways that we do know that therapy is working is when the person is able to keep themselves safe, when the person is able to use positive coping skills. So maybe before, this individual was self-medicating, looking for alcohol or any other type of substance to feel good about themselves. And so when we hear our clients or our patients reporting back, you know what, this week I tried this week I noticed that this didn't work, so I went back to something that you mentioned. So really it's about that, the individual sometimes controlling those distressing thoughts, and also learning how to self-soothe, and that's really important across the board, but specifically when we're talking about communities of color, because historically there is a sense of distrust with large systems of care, and what might happen if I do say how I really feel. Will I be placed on a psych hold?
Right.
So, what would you suggest are healthy ways of self-soothing and self-care? Let's, share some of the basic things, and then, maybe share some of the personal things that you do and that may
Okay.
not be as traditional. We want to give people lots of, options of things they can do, especially in this COVID environment that we're living in, because we've got to do as much of the traditional methods that we've had in the past and non-traditional,
Right.
considering where we are right now.
So I know for the work that I do in terms of suicide prevention, we have a lot of applications that are available. And actually, I think Kelly, you were going to put that
Yes.
on the banner. So these applications are free to download. Most of them are available on Android and iOS platform. So people are able to download them for free, and people are able to use those applications at home. Additionally, there are a lot of hotlines and crisis centers where people could call in when they're having difficulty. Just because it says a suicide prevention hotline doesn't mean that the only time that you could call is when you are suicidal. You could call when you're experiencing depression, anxiety, any other type of um, impairment that you may feel is going on. You could always call and talk to a trained crisis counselor, which is extremely important to address then and there what's going on. In terms of personally, for me, so I live in an apartment, and so sometimes when I watch TV or the news, people are saying, well, in your backyard and you do all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't have a backyard, so I have to get creative with my space.
Right.
And I know that people in other cities, Chicago and Atlanta, and here in LA too, sometimes when you live in an apartment building, you don't have the luxury of having your own private backyard. But for me, it's really about using whatever spare room is not being used to do some yoga, some prayer, some meditation, and really tap into a lot of reading for my own mental health well-being. Reading is extremely important, but prayer, meditation, and moving my body inside of my apartment.
Right.
You said moving your what?
Moving my body inside my
Oh
apartment.
yeah. Oh yeah. I have some ways I'll share after Dr. Lane.
I do some of those same things as well. Exercising is key. That's
Yes, it
a
is.
good thing for me because you're like cramped in the house, right? Even if you do have a yard, or you just feel kind of stuck. So it's important to get out, get some fresh air, and do something that'll revitalize your spirits. And speaking of spirits, church. Church is very important. It's been a refuge, even though it's on virtual.
Right.
It's still a good way to kind of release and relate and let
Yeah.
go and let God, and being in tune with that is very important. it's a way of grounding myself as we go through these things, right?
Yeah.
So, and just checking in with myself. How am I feeling today? How am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
And allowing myself to feel what I feel.
Right.
Because just as Franklin mentioned, it's like those tides, right? They come in and they go out. But if we repress them, they may come out in a not so productive way or maladaptive way. And so it's important to feel what you feel. And then for me also is just keeping in mind that even in the midst of COVID, there's a larger purpose. I have a larger purpose. I play a role in someone's healing, in someone's development, in my own healing, in my own development. And as I look at my family as well. And that's a key motivator for me to keep me going and keep me in check and in tune. And yeah, it's a big resource for me. My family, my church, friends. I always connect with my friends. That we've got this Zoom thing where we connect, and it's good catching up with folks. And in fact, we've brought in people that we haven't seen in a while. So like, oh yeah, that's cool. So, you know, people I wouldn't normally have caught up with, like, oh yeah, let's connect. So it's important for me to be connected, to know that,
same here.
you know, I'm not alone. And those feelings and those thoughts, when I am alone, you know what? Somebody else is probably going through those same thoughts, having those same experiences. So I have to check that. Like, oh, okay. All right, if I'm feeling this way, maybe somebody else is too. So let me reach out to one of my boys from college. Let's check in and see how they're doing. Or, you know, even at home, like with my wife, like, hey, babe, you know, how are we doing? How are we balancing things with kids here and work? It's definitely a challenge. Definitely a challenge. And so we have to be in constant communication. We have to plan. We have to develop things together. And in fact, I'll just share this and be candid with you. It's brought my wife and I closer, and how we work together as a team. So it's a good thing. COVID has been a blessing in some ways, because it's afforded us to reevaluate what is truly important. What do we really value? Yes. And so, yeah.
So on that note, Dr. Lang, any advice for couples who are particularly struggling as a result of COVID? One of the first things that we heard, you know, at the beginning of quarantine, that alcohol sales went up and spiked significantly. And then also that there was a lot of domestic violence, right? As well as couples breaking up, whether, you know, married or not. So what can people do who are struggling to get some help and to recognize, okay, is this just a result of what's going on, and how can we work together to be better? Right. Or to determine, you know what, this wasn't working before, it's definitely not working now, but how can we move forward peacefully and lovingly, even as we separate?
That's a good question. Great question. As you mentioned, the increase in alcohol went up. The intake of alcohol was going up, and other vices as well. Right. And domestic violence has increased. It's important that we give each other space, if we can. I know things are tight, spaces are tight, we're getting on each other's nerves, and that's quite normal. It's a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance where communication is needed. As I mentioned, that my wife and I, we've been in constant communication, but we also allow each other space too. And so it's important to be able to be well yourself before you can love or be with someone else. Yes. And realizing that it's important. I encourage folks to, if they're not able to handle things amongst themselves, seek outside help. And maybe there's a pastor, maybe there's a counselor that they could reach out to help mediate and help them discern whether or not this situation is viable. And even if it is or isn't, how do they work it out? So reaching out to someone is key. Getting someone else, a third party involved, as much as we may want to hold on to that and not have anybody in our business, it's probably the best thing to do. And of course, get your own individual help with that. So as I mentioned, you have to be whole yourself before you can love someone else or be with someone else. You have to be in a place where you are whole and centered before you have to be. People think marriages are 50-50. No, it's 100-100. You give your all, your partner gives their all. And that's in any relationship, especially if you want it to go, and excel.
Franklin, did you want to chime in?
Yes. I think in the media, we hear this often, people saying, we're all in this together. We're all in this together. We may all be in the same storm together, but each one of us is weathering this storm very differently. We know that people who have access to resources, we know that people who are employed, they're not facing some of the challenges that communities of color, specifically Black and brown folks, are facing with unemployment, with inequity in regards to access to healthcare. So, we have seen a rise in domestic violence, and we know that there's going to be an increase in child abuse because, there's just a lot of stressors in the home, especially if we can't make our rent or our mortgage. That is a huge stress. And so here in LA County, we have our text line, which is 741-741. And so if somebody is in an abusive relationship and they feel that maybe they need help, but they're not at that point, like Dr. Lang said, where their partner is giving 100% or they're doing well themselves, somebody could text and get that help that they need. Because the last thing that we want to see is somebody who could potentially, die because of abuse in the home, physical abuse going on in the home. So it's really important to make sure that we keep ourselves safe. If we're in an abusive relationship, that we're able to keep our children safe. And sometimes, again, going back to that stigma that we talked about in the beginning, it's really taking a good look at ourselves and where we're at, and realizing that we do need help and that we do want a better tomorrow, and that may mean maybe leaving this abusive relationship, and that's a very scary thing, and it's a very hard thing to do as well. So making sure that you weigh your options.
No, thank you, Franklin. There's a question that a lot of people have been asking and very curious about over the past couple of months. And, we thought that, some of the earlier fireworks had something to do with that. Generally, fireworks for 4th of July started moving up earlier. But then there's suspicion that, well, is it in response to being stuck in and at home, and it's an outlet because, doing the firework, and it seems like they're not regular fireworks anymore. It sounds like shooting, it sounds like bombing, and then to do it all through the day, even before dark, and then all through the night. It's like it's intentional to be disruptive and not allow anybody to get any rest. And then I was even suspecting, I said, well, maybe it seemed like they were chiming in with the protest, like this was an act of protest. From a mental health perspective, what do you believe, or has there been any research done to say, what is going on? Because it's a nationwide phenomenon with all of these disruptive noises and the noise pollution that's happening, that's preventing people from sleeping when we need it the most.
Yeah, with a lot of the, race-based incidents, from the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, going back, right?
I mean, we can go back decades, centuries.
On and
Emmett
on.
Till, right?
Emmett Till, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think you're right. People just needed a release and just trying to, you know, feel or express what's going on. They need
Mm-hmm.
some noise, to
Mm.
make noise, to make a protest, to make a statement, something that is loud and disruptive to, go with the flow of things. I think, well, there's studies that show, Latinx communities, African American communities, the level of trauma and stress is heightened, particularly with those communities of color because of race-based incidents.
Yes.
And it's horrific. It's horrific. But I think the people they're crying out. They're reaching out in the best
Mm-hmm.
way they can. And right now, everybody's experience and threshold is heightened. So
Yes.
it's taking things to another level. And it's important that we be there to support one another,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Franklin, did you want to
Yeah.
chime in on that?
Yes. So, with what's going on in Portland, where we have federal agents snatching people up from the streets and all these other abuses that we see um, by these federal agents, I know for certain communities, like my parents who came here as refugees, they have never seen something like this happen in the U.S., where you have a federal agent snatch somebody up from the street, because those are the same things that a lot of our communities of color fled from. So to come to the U.S., to be in a
Yes.
place where you think you are protected, where there's freedom, where you could um, peacefully march and demonstrate, and to see this, I think it is affecting a lot of people's sense of control, of
Mm-hmm.
predictability.
Yes.
And so we do see a lot of people maybe with higher levels of stress, some PTSD going on, um,
Mm-hmm.
which prevents them from sleeping, changes in sleeping patterns, eating patterns, forgetfulness. But, in regards to the noise pollution, I know that when we live in cities, that's one of the things that we've seen a lot. I live by the Santa Monica Airport, so there's a lot of just activity, helicopters flying really low.
Yes.
So it does create a disruption in your sleeping pattern, and even sometimes
It sounds like we're in a war zone.
Right. Right.
You know,
it
I will never forget May 29th, that Friday when everything started. It was like during the day, I needed to go to the store and I had waited and I'm like, okay, I have to go to the store. And then all of a sudden, and I was actually trying to rest. This was going to be my day for some self-care. And I ended up having to go to a funeral for a childhood friend that I wasn't anticipating having to do. And I found out with 10 minutes notice. I'm like,
Mm.
oh gosh, now I got to get into grieving mode, when I was into let me relax and try to have a day of getting some fresh air, to watching a virtual funeral service. And then once that was over, I'm like, okay, I have to go to the store, but now I'm sad and I'm not really moving and don't want to go out. And then next thing you know, I'm just hearing the helicopter. I mean, the helicopter was literally directly above me and just flying and I could feel it in my chest. Now I've heard helicopters. I hear sirens, fire trucks, police all the time, cars zooming by, but it was different. And it was so clear because I
Hmm.
another thing I want to say in terms of how we can take care of ourselves in self-care is to turn off the news,
Yes.
to turn off some of this negative programming that we're seeing and that we are feeding ourselves through media and entertainment. Sometimes it's too much. We have to, I believe, protect our spirits. And that's kind of one of the premises that Impact Media was founded upon. There's only so much we can take, and there's
Right.
only so much information we need to know and to have to get through the day. And you have to pace it out. You don't have to know everything right when it happens.
I don't think we could hear you, Kelly.
Yeah, her sound went out. Let's see here. Maybe we could text her.
Yes.
Thanks, Franklin.
I think she accidentally muted herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mute myself, but my headset, I think, went out.
Okay.
So as I was saying, the noise, it got to, I mean, it was really affecting me and affecting my sleep. And everything I'm trying to do is trying to get sleep so that I can be my best and take care of myself. And I could not get the sleep because it was being interrupted and it was something that I could not control. And I just started getting it under control about a week, 2 weeks ago, and now it's
And then it
coming
happened.
back again. And it's like, oh my goodness.
Something.
So what can people do, to do some of these basic things like get sleep, when you can't really control what's going on around you?
I think with everybody at home and glued to the TV, or they're forced to watch what happened if they are tuning in, it really escalated what has taken place. And there's like 3 factors as we look at racial discriminatory events, like the chronicity, how often this occurs. And like we were getting this back to back.
Yes.
Brianna, George,
Atlanta, even here,
Chicago, here, right?
Right.
And the also taking into consideration the intensity of the events. I mean, there's the incident that happened back in Texas where the young man was shot in his own home, right?
Yeah.
And the duration, how long does this last? Those 3 factors are kind of pouring into this heightened sense that we're experiencing. And it's causing us to react in the ways that we are. And I think it's best to kind of understand what's taking place from a ecological standpoint, looking at how people behave within systems and how those systems interact. There's Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. This explains behavior that takes place at the individual level, the meso level, how these systems interact with one another, the macro level, and it's all within a certain context. So the protest, they're not rioting, and some people will say they're rioting, but the civil unrest, the protests that are taking place, people are simply reacting to the levels of injustice that have taken place throughout the years, the unfair treatment from the police that has taken place.
Yeah.
The senseless killings and murders and brutality, the abuse of power, the abuse of power and the abuse of privilege that we see every day. These little microaggressions as well, that kind of just tip at us, and just kind of work to break our spirits. People of color, communities of color are saying no.
Absolutely.
No more. No more. This is a new day and age, and we are going to stand up for ourselves, and we're going to defend ourselves, and we're going to hold those in power accountable.
And thank God for the others who are joining us.
Right. Thank goodness for our allies.
Absolutely. Those who are bold and courageous enough to speak up and to join in and to check on us who are suffering. So we thank them for that. The other thing that I'd like to talk about as we're, beginning to wind down the conversation, and this has been phenomenal. I know that it's going to bless and help a lot of people. We talked about some of the warning signs and kind of what to do if you're, believe that you're beginning to, slip into a depression. Another thing that's really common, in our communities, and as we're dealing with a lot of trauma, and we mentioned PTSD, I work with a woman who I've heard coin the term continued traumatic syndrome, not just post, but continued traumatic stress, syndrome, especially in communities of color. When what do you do, if you believe you're experiencing a high level of anxiety and feel like you're having a panic attack, or you see someone who may be going through that? What's something that can be done in the moment to support someone or yourself if you're going through it and you haven't experienced that before?
So one of the things that is extremely crucial is to know that there are resources out there for us, and these resources could be from a crisis hotline to one of the applications, which we mentioned are available if they email you, Kelly. And people are able to download these applications. And some of these applications have really cool kind of like mind distraction. There's applications for breathing. So all that is in the resources that Kelly has as well.
Yes.
So using some of those tools, on ourselves, but also having them and having a discussion with maybe loved ones. Hey, you know what? I've tried this app. We know that younger generations aren't necessarily calling hotlines, so they're looking at texting and these applications where you kind of do things on your own. But that a lot of these applications allow you also the option to call into a hotline if after all these games and self-soothing techniques you are feeling a certain way, whether it's suicidal or you're in a mental health crisis. You could always call one of these hotlines and speak to somebody. But you could also offer these applications to loved ones, to colleagues. I think we're very fortunate here in LA County to work in a system where we support one another with these resources. Here in LA County, we have Headspace available for LA County residents for free until December 31st. And so I even use Headspace sometimes.
It's helpful
to go to sleep. That has like background noise to cut down on the helicopters and stuff like that. So you could.
I play ocean waves.
Yeah, I do.
Try to help me sleep.
Good.
Yeah, Dr. Lang, I'm sorry.
But yeah, I would concur with what you're saying. There's at least 4 areas that we could look at as we deal with grief, loss, and trauma, and kind of working through that. So recovering of your self capacities, like looking at positive images and building up your self-esteem and your self-thought, who you are and being able to feel like a good enough person to be able to move forward with what's taking place, and looking at your emotions as well, managing how you react to certain things. And again, it's important to feel what you feel, but just like those tides, they will come and they will go. And they may not last for a long time, but you got to be able to cope with them. And then
you mentioned feeding yourself positive content. That's another premise of Impact Media. We're creating positive and uplifting content and promoting that that others feed themselves, because it's not just about not watching or consuming some of the negative things. It's how you program yourself.
Right.
And there's a lot of more variety of positive content featuring Black people, brown people, Asian people, where we can now see ourselves in the content in a more positive, uplifting way. And, consuming that is really, really important.
Right.
Go ahead, Dr. Lane.
Very important. No, you're right on point. And just like Franklin was saying, those coping skills, like something that you can do in the moment is maybe a breathing exercise, maybe something physical where you're running or you're exercising in itself, prayer, meditation, reading your Bible. Those are key things. The meditation, the serenity prayer has been helpful for me. And yes, and finding spiritual meaning in all that, and meaning and spirituality with that. So if those kind of 4 areas are covered, you're good. And of course, seeking out social support. So looking at your own self capacities, developing coping skills, having a social support network, and finding meaning and spirituality will help deal with trauma, will help deal with grief and loss.
Absolutely. I dance. Music and dance are really important to me, whether pre-COVID,
Yeah.
and I had to figure out how to work it in during COVID. I follow some DJs in Chicago and across the country, and they'll have some virtual dance parties. My daughter would come in and tease me and laugh at me because I'm dancing in front of a computer screen, but I'm like, I don't care. I got to do what I have to do.
Right,
I'll
right.
dance
Good for
around the
you.
house. I'll go out on my balcony and dance when nobody's out there and just get these steps in the best way I can.
And I hope
Listening
your
to my
dancing
gospel
is
music.
nobody's watching
That's
too.
right.
There you
I'm
go.
getting better by myself. You don't need a dance partner until you can get one. Just videos. There's just all kinds of things that you can do, and it is important to learn. If you haven't had the opportunity, I've been in isolation in various periods and points in my life where you have to learn how to be by yourself.
Yes.
You have to learn how to love yourself, have fun with yourself, be by yourself until you can be with someone else. So,
Hmm.
in closing, why don't you share what you'd like to say, as well as share how people can stay connected to you and follow you on social media?
Franklin,
Franklin, you want to go?
Um, so for social media, actually, we do have a policy within
Okay,
the county where
sure.
we're not able to have contact with
Okay.
our
Or
clients.
the website, the website for your agency or the phone number. That'd be great.
Yeah. So
Or
actually,
triage or whoever,
yeah,
however that process works.
we have our DMH warm line, which is a hotline where people here in LA County could call in, and it's kind of a threefold. It's for people in the community who need resources right now during COVID-19. It is also for people who are feeling like they need to talk to somebody. We're able to provide a few sessions on the phone for folks, and then also for our veteran and military population, we have that option where we are able to connect our veterans and our military population to individuals who are trained to work with vets and military population. And that number is 1-800-854-7771. 1-800-854-7771. That is also the number that we have here in LA County for any type of psychiatric emergencies, or if somebody wants to consult.
Excellent.
We have that number there to help our communities. Googling actually the list of resources, Kelly, that you have.
Yes.
So,
And I am going to copy those resources that you made available. Thank you so much for making resources available, not only in Los Angeles, but Chicago, Atlanta. Those are our key markets, and the national hotlines that are available that people can call in from all over. So we will definitely make sure that those are in the comment sections of the live stream.
yeah, so those the national hotline is extremely important
Yes.
as well. So those are some of the resources. Dr. Lang, I don't know if you.
And just to reiterate what you were saying, we also have our DMH, the website, dmh.lacounty.gov. You can attain resources there, and that'll be a good way to get connected, get plugged in. And throughout the county, we have clinics directly operated and county contracted that people can plug into and get the help that they need.
Also, a lot of cities, including Los Angeles County, we have 211. So you could always call 211 and inquire about services in your city, services in a specific language, in a specific area. So the most important point is to feel like you're not in this alone. There are resources out there. There might be a little bit of a waiting period, just to be transparent, but I think it's extremely important that maybe in that time while you're getting linked to help, that you're using some of these hotlines and other resources, such as making sure that you're connecting with your congregation or a spiritual leader,
Right.
to keep
So
yourself safe.
let me ask you this. If someone is experiencing like a mental health emergency, a suicide emergency, that's a 911 call, correct?
It can be.
It can't. Okay.
There's
So,
also the access hotline, which we were referring to,
mhm.
and they have a good way of handling those calls as well, those crisis calls as well. And that number is 1-800-854-7171. No, 7771.
7-1.
Yeah.
Say one more time.
1-800-854-7771.
Okay,
That's our access
perfect.
hotline.
We also have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that one, it's very simple. You could just text 838-255. So it's 838-255, and that connects you to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Pretty much wherever you're at in the country, you'll get routed to the closest crisis hotline center, and from there you could speak to a trained crisis counselor. I've had people ask me before, is it an avatar, is it something that auto populates a response? I know these are actually trained crisis counselors. So if you text 838-255 from your phone, you're able to connect immediately to somebody who will check in on you and ask you what's going on. But it's important also to know that there's a huge distrust sometimes with our systems of care and calling 911, and what that may mean if I'm a single parent with kids in the home, because if I have to go to a psychiatric hospital, who's going to be taking care of my kids? What's going to happen? So there's a chain of events sometimes that happens when people are hospitalized to keep themselves safe, but that shouldn't stop anybody from seeking help, and that's why these resources were made available so that people could have them, and really relying on the community and your support system to help you.
This was so insightful and informative. I really appreciate you both. I thank you so much. And I invite you and encourage you, as we said offline, to come back, and share with us. This is, we don't know when the end of this cycle of being completely overloaded is going to subside in any way. And I believe it's going to be important to continue to share, continue to, have these conversations and share, tips and allow, conversations. We didn't get too many comments or questions today, but I believe the information that you shared was spot on and extremely timely and relevant culturally, as well as just relevant for what we're all experiencing today. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'll be in touch for sure, and we'll have you back.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You take care, and you continue to take care of yourself.
Yes.
Likewise.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
That was incredible. So grateful to Dr. Lang and Franklin for joining us on our 24th live stream for Impact Media Presents Dealing with Loss and Grief. I want to make sure you're aware we're doing a double header this week on Friday, July 31st. Join us as we have a conversation with Art Johnson, the CEO of Infinity Systems, who's going to be talking about an incredible benchmarking tool called Equimetrics. And you must tune in on Friday morning for that. It'll be 9:00 a.m. Pacific and noon Eastern. Again, Art Johnson will be talking about Equimetrics, a very unique diversity benchmarking tool that I believe you would want your employer, your company, your church, your nonprofit organizations to actually utilize around creating equity for all people in the workplace as well as in our communities. Thank you so much, and you have a great rest of the week. Take care until Friday. Bye-bye.